Well, hey everyone, welcome back to our Beyond Sunday midweek video. So I'm glad you're here. This is episode 3 for the series Family Rhythm. Uh, this past Sunday, we tackled the rhythm, what I call the rhythm of growth. And it's really what I would call the rhythm of being intentional about your spiritual growth. And I think it's probably the most personally convicting of the whole series. Let me give you a quick recap. We opened with a picture of a family that I think many of us recognized or connected with, like good people, busy people, though, people that show up to church. Your kids are doing all right. But if you ask them honestly, when was the last time you had a serious faith conversation at home? They would have to think pretty hard. And that's not unusual. And we're just used to in our culture today saying, hey, it's just the season of life we're in. Everyone is busy. It's just the way it is. And so the core idea was simply this, that not being intentional about spiritual growth is still a decision. It's a passive decision, and passive decisions don't produce positive outcomes. They produce drift. Because while your family has been busy just trying to survive, the world and the culture around you is busy discipling your family. And so the average American child, we talked about this, spends 7 to 9 hours a day exposed to screens. And that screen time is forming them into a particular type of person with a particular set of values. And it really does, it's doing a lot to their spiritual development. So how do we counteract that? How do we be intentional about discipleship? We looked at 3 things. One, that faith must be a part of everyday life. We talked about the Shema, the Jewish prayer from Deuteronomy 6. We talked about what we model matters more than what we say. And we looked at the story in 2 Timothy of how Timothy was, his faith was really developed, transferred from his mother and grandmother. And third, we talked about how growth requires intentional rhythms. And we talked about Psalm 78, that beautiful passage that talks about how faith is transmitted from one generation to the next. And so the big idea for the whole message this week was spiritual growth doesn't happen by accident. Healthy families are going to intentionally help one another follow Jesus. So let's kind of jump in. And each week, as I'm doing these, I've been going over a few questions that may come up in your mind. And so today I've got 5 questions. Let's kind of go through these and hopefully reinforce what we learned on Sunday. Here's the first question. This message made me feel like I've already failed. My kids are older. We didn't have these type of rhythms when they were young. Is it really not too late? And I think a question like this, if you're listening, probably is coming out of a sense of disappointment, a sense of frustration, a sense of, man, I wish I would have done things differently. Here's what I said at the end of the message, and I want to say it again. The God who raised Jesus from the dead can restore what the years have taken. That's the theological reality. God He is merciful, He is loving, He is full of grace, and He can do in your family what you think is impossible. Think about this story in Luke 15 of the prodigal son. The father didn't stop watching the road just because his son had been gone a long time. He was still looking and waiting and watching and praying. And the moment the son turned toward home, the father ran to him. That is the God we're dealing with. Don't miss that in the story of the prodigal son. It's really the story of the love of a father, and it's the story of our Heavenly Father's love for us. He is not finished with your family just because the early years did not go the way you had anticipated. You can start new rhythms today. That's the reality. You can have those conversations that you wish you would have had. You can have those now. You can start praying with your spouse now. You can start praying with your kids. The chain of faith described in Psalm 78 does not have a cutoff date. and neither does the grace of God. So just trust God and keep going. Question 2. I want to build these rhythms, but my spouse isn't interested in praying together or having spiritual conversations. What do I do when we're not on the same page, not on the same page spiritually? Seems like each week I'm hitting a question like this, and I think the reason I'm talking about it is because it's so common. You can't force spiritual intimacy. You can't pressure your spouse into doing something that they don't want to do. So you have to think about your approach, just not your intentions. What I would encourage is this, and each week we're saying something similar to this. You have to model it yourself. You have to invite. Let your spouse see your own faith lived out authentically without making them a project that you're trying to reach, right? A spouse that watches you and sees the change in you as you genuinely spend time with God, and they see your faith growing, and they see how it changes how you treat other people. They see how it changes the love and respect shown in a home. They see how it changes how you treat the kids. Man, that's going to draw them in ways that guilt can never do. The second thing I would say is you've got to be praying for them privately, consistently, specifically. The most powerful thing I think you can do is to pray for your spouse if they are struggling. And so instead of guilting them, instead of, trying to argue with them, just pray for them. And third, look for the small opportunities, right? That, to start having these type of conversations. Start small. You don't have to start with a 30-minute devotion or a long, extended hour-long prayer time with your spouse. Hey, as they're going out the door, ask them if you can have a quick prayer with them. Just little things, these small natural movements create a lot of positive momentum. Here's the third question. We tried family devotions before and they just fell apart. So how do you actually make this stick? I think probably everybody has bought a devotional book or came up with a plan and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then you did it once or twice and then you just set it on a shelf and never did it again. I think most family attempts fail because they're too formal. Let me say that again, because I really do think this is an issue. I think they fail because they're too formal, they're too long, they're too disconnected from everyday real life. And so if you have a picture, it's kind of these unrealistic expectations you've set up. If you have it in your mind, okay, we've got to sit down and do this and do this and do this. Then when you get busy and someone has a practice that you didn't plan on and you can't do it on Monday night and then you can't do it on Tuesday night, you can't do it on Wednesday night, and before long, you've made it through a whole week and you don't have the time to set aside to do what you had planned to do. I think what Deuteronomy 6 and the Shema does, it frees us from that type of thinking. Moses doesn't describe a formal devotion time. He just talks about how do we incorporate faith into the everyday little moments of life, just like breathing. It's just part of what we do. We're working it in when we lie down, when we get up, when we have breakfast, at lunch, when we're riding in the car, when we're at the dinner table, our bedtime routine, our Saturday mornings, when we're working in the yard. Whatever we're doing, we're incorporating faith into those times. And so I think that is what is sustainable. Instead of setting apart a formal, rigid time where everything's got to look perfect and be perfect. And I think part of that issue is Instagram and Pinterest and all these things that they show you these unrealistic depictions of what your family should be like. And we put all this pressure on ourselves, but it's sustainable when we just work these spiritual rhythms into what we're already doing. Just instead of trying to schedule it out, just try starting a conversation when you're already together. Try praying out loud with your child before they walk out the door in the morning. Instead of a Bible study with your spouse, just try asking each other every day, hey, what has God been putting on your heart lately? And that will develop into more structured times. But what is more important is those small, consistent rhythms of everyday life. Here's the fourth one, and this is a big one. How can we reverse the trend of our children being on screens all day? This is a tough one. And I think I've got to spend some time here. In a previous sermon series a while back, I talked about a book called The Anxious Generation. It's a best-selling book. The author, he recommended 4 things that are all pretty controversial in today's world. No smartphones before high school. No social media before age 16. He recommended phone-free schools. And he recommended more free, unstructured, independent playtime with our kids because we've overprotected our kids in the physical world while underprotecting them online. I'm going to just say I agree with those. I look at the problem of anxiety and stress and in our young children and our teenagers, and screen time is a huge part of it. And so I would even throw on a few more things you should think about doing. And again, this may be a little controversial. This is my opinion, but I'm telling you, we have to be intentional about this. I would say don't allow screens in bedrooms for your kids, children or teenagers. That means no TVs, no computers, no phones in their bedroom. Keep them in the public places in your home. So that means you charge all your phones maybe in the parents' room. That means if they're on the computer, they do it in the public spaces. Why? Because it brings it out into the open, into the family, where you can keep an eye on what they're doing and where you can talk about it and where it's not something that they just do by default when they're bored. So that's a huge one. No screens in bedrooms. And again, I know this is like, some of y'all be like, Mike, that's unrealistic. I get it. But really think about 7 to 9 hours a day is what's the average in our world is. So for teens on their screen. So this is, I'm pretty fired up about this. I think we've got to do something. The other thing I would say is use apps to monitor screen time. Now, your phone has some of this in. Apple has screen time built in. There's other apps and tools. Brick is one where you can have these little bricks that you touch your phone and it turns off all the social media. And you can set that up, set time limits. There's an app I use even called Be Present. And you can set up different apps and have different time limits on different apps and different times of the day where you can use it. And it works really well. So it's not going to be easy, but you've got to make that choice. So if you've got more questions about that, I'd love to chat more with you about it. Here's the 5th question, the final one. What about grandparents whose children have walked away from faith and your kids then won't let you talk to your grandkids about spiritual things? And I've had this come up a few times, like where the grandparents are really praying for their grandkids and want to disciple them, but the parents have gone a different direction. Here's what I'll say again, like what you model in your own life in front of your grandchildren is more powerful than you'll ever know. Children will absorb a lot of that and they'll see how you live and they notice when you have a peace that doesn't make sense. They notice how you handle things differently. They notice the Bible on the coffee table and when you open it up and read it. They notice how you pray. They notice how you talk naturally about God just through normal conversations. So you can pray for them. You can live out your faith in front of them. And their natural curiosity, I think, will give you opportunities as they grow older to share your faith with them. And so I think that's a huge way to model it. So that's the 5 questions today. Let me just kind of give you a few things in closing. How do we implement this in everyday life? And so I would give you 4 things. First, start identifying the moments that are already there. You don't have to create new time. You just need to use the time that you already have differently. So that's the first. Second, just start asking one question. If you don't know where to start with a spiritual conversation, Here's a question that works in almost any context and any age. What has been hardest for you this week? That question opens a door, and that open door is all you need then to bring faith into a real moment. Third, pray out loud in front of someone. Not a performance. Just let the people in your home hear you pray. Your children, your spouse, your parents, let them hear you pray out loud about real life problems. I think it's one of the most faith forming things you can do. And fourth and finally, tell a story. Psalm 78 says we are to tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. Just start telling people what God's doing in your life. That's evangelism. That's discipleship. That's the story of God at work in our life. So that's it for this week. Next Sunday, we're going to close out the Family Rhythm series with the rhythm of rest, of slowing down. And I want to be honest with you because I think for a lot of us, this might be the most difficult message. But it's also the one, right? If we don't rest, then it's going to be hard to have time to do all this other stuff that we've been talking about. So don't miss it. If this helped you, share it with someone. I'm excited about this series. I think it's been helpful. Thank you for being part of the research project we're doing on the side as well. And so I'm excited to see what God does through this. So God bless.